Tyler Wackman, welcome to MedTech Unboxed.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to connect and schedule this and um, talk about EOS, which will hopefully you can give the audience an overview of that. It's something that I've recently been involved with and wanting to learn more and implement it. So, what better opportunity to have an expert on the podcast to talk about it, right?
Yeah, well, in this conversation, long term coming, right? I mean, gosh, we've
Right.
we've been crossing paths for several years, and so I'm glad to just excited to kind of bring this all together.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a good way to do it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Hit the record button.
yeah,
Before we start, Tyler, why don't you give our listeners a little overview of your background, and then maybe we'll go into a little bit about EOS after that.
yeah, and we'll try to make it kind of applicable to your audience.
Right.
So yeah, my story is I grew up in family owned manufacturing in Houston, Texas, in the steel packaging industry, which is
Hmm.
not the sexiest product on the planet, but a useful one nonetheless.
Yep.
I thought I was going to be the kind of a part of the next generation of leadership there. Went to college thinking I was going to return back and start at the back shipping dock and work my way to the front office. But that's not actually what happened. My father actually died of a heart attack my senior year in college. And so instead of doing that, that ultimately led to the sale of that business
Hmm.
to take care of mother and some stakeholders. And I went off to do about a 7 or 8 year stint in inside of private equity that ultimately led to running a couple companies, and one of those companies happened to be in catheter manufacturing space. Primarily on the automation and equipment space, in a business called SYNEO,
Yeah.
which I know you're familiar with. That is now a part of MMT, and spent several years at SYNEO. We grew it, and that's actually where I was actually introduced to EOS. Deep in that journey, I
Yeah.
would say that it was very much caught me at 9 p.m. on a Saturday, trying to figure out how I was going to call my wife and explain to her that I would not be home on
Yeah.
Sunday, but I needed to stick around so that way the business can be ready to rock on Monday. Um, and so we sat through a session actually in Cleveland from an implementer there, and I just drank the Kool-Aid rather quickly. Came back, got the team on board, and we implemented EOS right in the middle of I think 2019.
Okay.
Um, and that just led to kind of change in growth trajectory for us, clarity of vision of like where we were headed. Um, and we just had enough wins, and I think we ultimately kind of garnered the attention of a large strategic in the space that ultimately ended up becoming what is to now MMT. So
Okay.
I stayed on the business for about a year. Ultimately, just became a spoke in a pretty large wheel, and kind of
Mhm.
felt like I'd taken the business as far as I could, and decided to transition out. Spent 6 months as a stay-at-home dad. Boy, did I fail miserably at that job.
It's a tough one. Tough
Hardest
call.
hardest job so far.
Yeah. No doubt.
And kind of reflecting on what I wanted to do next, I just really enjoyed the EOS experience and wanted to replicate that as many times over as possible. And that ultimately kind of brought us back together, just
Yeah.
because I know you just started your EOS journey with Chamfer. So
Yes.
that's
Exactly.
really kind of brings us to today.
Yeah. So we're going to get into some interesting topics, but before we do that, we keep talking about this EOS, and if we could tell people what it means and how it's related to this very popular book by Gino
Sure.
Wickman, Traction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. So traction and EOS just stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. Um, and what EOS is, it's really just this compilation of simple kind of business concepts and tools that have been around for 100 years, and they're going to be around for another 1,000.
Mhm.
They were all kind of compiled by a lifelong entrepreneur by the name of Gino Wickman. Only one letter difference.
Yep.
I think his greatness far exceeds mine. Uh, but really, it's just that it's a compilation of tools to just help founders, entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurial leadership teams run a better business, and then kind of, frankly, kind of live a better life. Because there's just so many frustrations that kind of common entrepreneurs deal with, whether it's lack of control, lack of profit, just people issues, just that feeling of constantly being stuck. And Gino wanted to kind of create this secret sauce between the average entrepreneurial company that battles with all those frustrations and that 5% of entrepreneurial companies that seem to overcome them. And so, yeah, I read Traction back in 2019, and just finally felt like, okay, this is a woven set of tools that all kind of works together, and helped me kind of overcome that, listening to listening to a
Mhm.
podcast or listening to a thought leader and trying to take that concept and frankly just jam it down my team's throat, which was yielding very poor results, as you can imagine. So yeah, that's it in Traction in a nutshell. Is it's really the guidebook, um, to EOS.
Okay. You referred to it on one of our earlier conversations as a method to manage human energy.
Yeah,
And I really thought that was fascinating. If you can dig deeper into that and how managing human energy independent of the industry. And
yeah,
my listeners are mainly MedTech, obviously, but you gave me an example of how you were able to kind of use this methodology and for a construction company.
sure.
And of course, we want to dig into deeper and your experience in implementing it at SYNEO.
Yeah, yeah. So, so yeah, a lot of times when we talk with entrepreneurial companies, entrepreneurs are a lot of times they feel like their situations are extremely specific, and nobody does it like we do it. And through the sheer number of reps that EOS has been used by, like I think it's 30,000 companies that I've worked with an implementer. You really kind of boil it down to these concepts really just apply to humans,
Hmm.
not really by industry. And yeah, coming out of the SYNEO experience, I never thought I would be working with construction companies. But that's a kind of some feedback we face a lot is like how is this going to help me deal with the frontline worker? And when you kind of boil it down, it's like the frontline worker may not really be the issue. It's more about harmonizing all the human energy from the C-suite all the way to the foreman and how that can benefit any organization. So I think that's really important. And frankly, there's some transferability here, um, in regards to whether it's construction or whether it's custom automation. There's a parallel and kind of pain point. At SYNEO, we would go into a clean room a lot of times, and the entrepreneur, or I'm sorry, the engineer would meet us at the door,
Yeah.
right? And we'd go, we're here. Let's walk the clean room. Let's go take us to your problem, and they'd walk us over to a work center. And what in particular I remember was like, there were like three or four people sitting at a work center, and they were like hand weaving like these metal baskets, right? That were going
Mhm.
into some type of neuro application. And I just remember sitting there just going like, there is no way, or for at least for the amount of money that we think they are willing to spend here to really automate this.
Mhm.
But the reality is on that walk to that work center, we probably passed 3 or 4 other work centers where there was this, like, team of 15 people that were sitting there roll cutting catheter tubing, or someone else is sitting there, like, manually hole drilling or whatever it was.
Yep.
And there's just, like, such a parallel to that and, like, human energy when you're dealing with kinda companies and their issues is they take us to they focus on the almost the uncontrollable or the unautomatable
Mhm.
process because that's their biggest pain point. That's what's staring them in the face every day. And a way that EOS kind of does that in a broader sense is we identify the fact that I understand your problem is this basket that is unautomatable, but what about all the low hanging fruit that we just walked past? What about getting your team very on the same page with vision, with trash, and just becoming a healthy organization? What could that do to help you with your biggest problem? And in the automation and environment, it was very much around if we automated the roll cutting and we redeployed all of that overhead savings and threw it at your unautomatable process, would that ultimately result in an improved throughput scenario, which was kind of his ultimate intent? And so I see a parallel similar in a lot of other companies out there where if we get the C-suite all the way to the foreman in the construction industry, rowing in the same direction, communicating and executing at a higher degree of accountability and discipline, that's only going to help you manage your biggest issue, which in their eyes, is at the field crew level that just has inherent levels of turnover, and challenges associated. So that's kind of a detailed explanation of how human energy, kind of regardless of industry, and kind of how it ties into, a real world kind of catheter manufacturing
Yeah.
scenario.
Thank you for that. Excellent. You know, one of the things I've noticed in smaller contract manufacturers that might have a real niche area in whether it's polymer processing, metals processing, whatever it might be a lifestyle type company, right?
Sure.
And full of tinkerers. I know a company not far from me, it's brilliant people, brilliant guys, and they're kind of in a garage doing tinkering, but they couldn't kind of take it to the next level,
Sure.
the business, because they're constantly tinkering and that's what they love to do. And everything, even when you talk to them about a business opportunity, it always kind of goes back to the tinkering. So just
Um,
wondering how this methodology, this operating system could help with that type of environment.
sure. Okay. So first of all, I appreciate this. I think because custom automation was what was very similar to this. Some of the most dangerous words at times were, "Wouldn't it be cool?"
Yeah.
Is that phrase, could turn you into an accidental nonprofit pretty quickly. Uh,
Yeah.
but I think the whole element here is, with EOS or really anything, um, if you can process out the predictable, I'm blanking on whose quote this is, but it's if you can process out the predictable, you can humanize the exceptional. And the challenge is putting process into entrepreneurial companies, especially entrepreneurial companies that are run by engineers who are tinkerers,
Yes.
artists. Um, they feel like it's constricting and it's not giving them the flexibility they need to ultimately serve their customer. But what we find is that if we can process the things that are predictable, that actually enables them to have more time and more flexibility and somewhat guardrails, and it actually frees them up to continue to tinker, to continue to do what they really want to do without creating this absolute ceiling for the rest of the organization. Because that ultimate founder is really kind of going after two things, right? They're trying to serve the needs of their customer, and then they're also trying to serve the needs of their soul, which
Yeah.
is continuing to innovate, continue to be relevant, continue to tinker, because that's what probably got them into this. That's their passion. That's what
Their,
they're
their,
surrounded
their,
by.
their secret sauce.
You bet. So
Yeah.
there are many times where, process is like the last thing the entrepreneur, the visionary wants to talk about. And I've worked with plenty of them. Um, I say that with complete love from some of the
Yes.
founders involved in SYNEO, brilliant engineers. But the minute we really talked about business process, I knew I had about 10 more seconds before they just either got distracted and got on their phones or immediately just went to sleep. But it was truly built around enabling them to continue to do what they want to do most. And in an EOS concept or attraction concept, really kind of talks about two roles that we discuss, really, of the visionary and the integrator. And in this scenario, the visionary is that person who loves to be at 30,000 feet. They're highly innovative. They've got 20 new ideas every day. One of them's gold. 19 may not be so great, but we've got one that's like can truly move the business forward, or truly has uncovered a pain point inside the industry that we can act on. And they're big on culture, they're big on customer relationships, but they just don't do really well in the weeds and just like executing the same stuff day in, day out. They just get bored. And that kind of brings you into this like integrator role, which is kind of the second element of an EOS company. And they're the ones that are really blocking and tackling and executing at a really high level and kind of handling those tough conversations and kind of integrating the functions across the leadership team. So getting allowing the founders, the engineers, the people that love to dream and innovate, giving them the freedom and the capacity to do so, but also ensuring that the other set of roles that are really required to execute and drive the business are covered, really frees them up to, to humanize the exceptional, if you will.
Gotcha. That same type of organization, even maybe a small to mid-size manufacturing company that might want to sell the business, work with private equity or another investment partner. And I've heard a lot of stories about, we had an LOI in place, but during due diligence and all the rigmarole, it fell through. Right? There's so many stories
Sure,
about how that
sure,
just didn't pan out even after an LOI, a letter of intent. And you mentioned during one of our conversations how this EOS system really helped you transition during that process.
sure, sure. Yeah. Okay. I know where you're going here. So, I'll back up a little bit and say, yeah, like s- 8 years inside of private equity, like went through rounds and rounds and rounds of diligence as a buyer. And so you definitely saw the full gamut of independent of kind of a managed process, direct to the founder or direct to the seller, wide array of preparedness for a transaction. And then you get into professional processes where they've hired an investment banker, and it was, there's a data room, it's pretty organized, and you kind of would catch everything in between. Um, but I would say that everything, the difference between those is the one that has hired the person and that is managing the process. They've already chosen to manage a process, so they've kind of already
Yes.
had an opportunity to assess their capacity, assess how much time and effort it's going to go to actually do this, and kind of been methodic about it. But so often that's not how transactions get done. Um,
Mhm.
and in SYNEO's case, that wasn't how it got done. I mean, our transaction, we were from LOI to close, I think in, 15 days, which was just unheard of.
Right.
Um, and if I kind of boil that back, it kind of goes after a bigger issue where just a lot of founders. I'll give you a family business example first. When like, with my dad, let's think of like transaction planning or like planning for the next thing,
Yes.
whatever the next life stage was. Those conversations went a lot like this, and I'm sure my brother can attest to this. You'd walk into his office and he'd say, "Dad, you're not getting any younger. You're not exactly you're not the epitome of health. Let's talk about what's going to happen next." And you'd usually get a pretty short response, 3 to 5 words, something around, like "screw off, kid." And that would be the end of the conversation. You just kind of go
Yeah.
right back to, and I just feel like inside family businesses, I think that happens more times than not.
Mhm.
And I think there's data to back that up. But ultimately, because no one really wants to confront their own mortality or what's next.
Right.
And so succession planning or exit planning can be really hard to be proactive about when it's labeled succession planning or
Mm.
or we're planning for you to no longer be here. Like those are scary things that no one wants to engage in. And so what I saw with EOS was we're doing a lot of the things like through the EOS tools, we're doing a lot of what would be done in succession planning because we're essentially creating inertia inside of an organization. And the parallel I'll give here is when in the family transaction, a sudden change, a sudden death, all of a
Mhm.
sudden really kind of leaves the company a little rudderless when there aren't these tools in place.
Right.
And what happens is stakeholders are ultimately kind of responsible to going into the business and trying to talk to a leadership team, and they're going to kind of give you their version of where the company was going and how we were planning to get there. And so it can be really challenging in those scenarios. But then in a scenario where it is a little bit more institutional, it was so easy to work through diligence checklists based on the work that we'd done inside the EOS tools. So when it was asking about customer employee data, yep, we already kind of had all that figured out. We had it on scorecards. We had measurables in place, which only instilled further confidence from the buyer that we knew what we were doing and we knew how we were doing it. in regards to process documentation. Did we have a 700-page SOP manual that no one ever used and read? Uh, it's somewhere in between that and like true entrepreneurial high level process, but we could still we had evidence that we were using it, and we used it. It was beyond kind of what ISO would
Mhm.
do. It would we had a marketing and sales process, we had operational processes, we had an HR process that gave us more leverage in that conversation of like, we're executing. You're going to have to pay more for a company that's executing versus a company that's in a dire situation.
Right. Right.
Um, and so it was it a value creator inside of a diligence process? I would say it's a more of like a value protector. I'm sure you've talked to plenty of companies that have walked through this, walked through
Yep.
a process, and the LOI at the beginning, that maybe it was at, 20 million. And by the time
Yeah.
we got through diligence, we're sitting at 16.
Hmm.
Okay. 20% reduction in purchase price here. And a
Right.
lot of it maybe didn't get completely, maybe the valuation at the end of the day stayed the same, but all of a sudden now there's all these contingencies in place
Right.
because of all these issues that we've smoked out that we don't have a really good answer to in the diligence process. So
Right.
all of that, I just found EOS really enabled us to, one, be prepared for a transaction, even though we weren't planning for a transaction. It kind of just sped us up. It sped that all up. And then I would say after that, like in a change of control scenario, you have a new buyer. They, regardless of how much they know about the industry, they're still getting the lay of the land, especially if you're closing that fast.
Yes.
Right? I mean, we were still trying to figure out nameplates in a way.
Yeah.
I'm not, I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. Um, but it also made kind of post close continuing to run on EOS until the broader organization kind of figured out their own operating mantra. It just allowed us to continue,
Mm.
to drive that inertia. And I think that's another kind of critical element. So when it comes to transactions, you can just keep, it just kind of keeps it going.
Right.
It allows your whole organization to communicate in a common language. And it serves as a really kind of cool tool if you're going to do tuck-in acquisitions. It's a way to start prioritizing a lot of that stuff and kind of compartmentalizing issues to where do we need to serve, when do we need to address these?
Right.
Is it this week? Is it in the next 90 days? Is it in the next year? Is this a long-term issue that we've got to solve in a future quarter?
Right.
And I think that's a really powerful thing, all suited for the company that, isn't 1,000 employees with
Right.
tons of mid-level management. And, that was what was really powerful for us. And I just wish that same kind of power to every other entrepreneurial company that's, going to go through not only just organic growth, but considering inorganic growth, but just doesn't have the tool set to do it.
Right. So it sounds like you can help people do this, right? This is a business now that you have. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your business and how people can get in touch with you if they're interested in pursuing or learning more about it?
Yeah, sure. So the EOS community of implementers, I think there's roughly 830 of them
Okay.
globally, and with a large concentration of those in the US. I'm based in Jupiter, Florida, but I serve customers really in the Southeast. But then just because I'm a manufacturing nerd at heart, I'd love to get involved in industries that I'm passionate about, and still think the medtech industry is one that's frankly underappreciated and underrepresented.
Right.
And so yeah, there's tons of like downloadable forms and tools on EOS worldwide, which I'm sure you've seen. And then yeah, you can always there's an implementer that can help kind of guide the process uh, with with other entrepreneurs. So really, it's direct outreach,
Yeah.
and that's really the best way to communicate. And the kind of the way that the process really starts is we just sit down and spend 90 minutes with that leader and their team, and kind of give them a live feel of what does an EOS like what does running on EOS feel like and look like.
Mhm.
Um, and we do that. There's no cost to that. That's just to give them a feel for what a quarterly feels like, because I know you
Yeah.
just went through one.
Right.
And that's the best way to do it.
Okay. Excellent. Well, Tyler, this has been great, very informative, and it's applicable, personally as well as I'm getting into this, and I think it would be interesting to a lot of other people as well. And
Sure.
sounds like they can reach out to you directly. I'll put your your information on the link so that people can reach out to you directly to learn more.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Steve,
Okay.
I really appreciate you
Yeah.
having me today. It's been
Thanks,
great.
Tyler. All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.